All right, so let's dive into Holden Caulfield's world. He's the narrator of The Catcher in the Rye, and you sent over some excerpts of the novel, so we're really going to be hearing straight from Holden. I think it'll be fascinating to unpack all this stuff, alienation and what it means to be a teenager, and that constant struggle to figure out what's real in a world that often seems, well, phony.
Yeah, it's amazing how Salinger captures that teenage alienation thing. I mean, this book has been debated and loved for decades because Holden's voice just feels so raw,
Yeah.
so real.
Yeah, it's like you're listening in on a friend's thoughts, right? Even if that friend is a little cynical
What about?
and maybe bends the truth a bit.
Oh, for sure. And that whole lying thing, that's key to understanding Holden. He's constantly surrounded by what he calls phoniness, and it's almost as if his lies are a way of pushing back, like he's trying to create his own reality.
You're right. That word phony, it's like his mantra. I mean, it's everywhere describing everyone. His classmates at this very prestigious school he goes to, Pencey Prep, random people he runs into in New York City.
Exactly. And that's where Salinger's use of stream of consciousness is so brilliant. We're right there in Holden's head,
Mm.
experiencing his thoughts as they come, unfiltered or often contradictory.
So you're saying there's more to it than just Holden being a grumpy teenager?
Oh, absolutely. That constant phony label, it's a symptom of something much deeper, his alienation. Holden's desperately searching for something real, for genuine connection in a world that feels totally fake to him.
So his cynicism, his lies, those are like defense mechanisms.
Exactly, a way of protecting himself from being let down.
Makes sense. And speaking of Pencey Prep, Holden really paints a vivid picture of the place. The dorms, the steak dinners they're forced to go to. It's like you're right there with him.
Right. And Salinger uses those details, all those sensory details, to build a world that, well, a world that embodies everything Holden hates. Take his description of Mr. Haas, the headmaster. He's all about the wealthy parents, the ones he thinks are successful, and ignores everyone else. To Holden, that's the ultimate phoniness.
Yeah, no wonder he feels so out of place. It's like everyone around him is playing a part and Holden just refuses to do it.
Right. And this brings us to Stradlater, Holden's roommate. He's basically everything Holden isn't. Handsome, confident, popular, but even Stradlater, Holden sees him as a phony, especially when it comes to how he treats girls.
Especially Jane Gallagher. I mean, it's clear Holden has feelings for her, and his reaction to Stradlater's date with her, intense, to say the least.
Holden's really uncomfortable with Stradlater going out with Jane, and it reveals a lot about his own, anxieties about relationships and all that. Remember, he puts Jane on a pedestal.
Hmm.
To him, she's pure, innocent, someone he really connects with. She's the opposite of how he sees Stradlater.
And it's interesting, Holden keeps mentioning this thing about Jane playing checkers. She never moves her kings out of the back row. Seems like a small detail, but it clearly means something to him.
Oh, it's brilliant. It symbolizes how Holden wants things to stay the same, how he longs for that time when things felt simple and genuine. Jane, in his memory, represents that time before all the messiness of adulthood, before innocence is lost.
And then suddenly, Holden just leaves Pencey in the middle of the night. It's impulsive, but you can feel how desperate he is. He can't handle all the phoniness anymore.
It's huge. That act, him leaving, it's like the start of his journey. An escape from that world he hates, he's thrown into this adult world that he so desperately wants to avoid.
So he ends up in New York City, which, let's be honest, isn't exactly an escape from phoniness. He has this really awkward run-in with those women in the lavender room, the ones obsessed with celebrity.
Oh, they represent everything Holden can't stand. Superficiality,
Yeah.
their fascination with fame, their empty conversations. It all just confirms his belief that the adult world is shallow and meaningless.
And then on that train ride, he just starts making up this elaborate story to Mrs. Morrow. Like he can't help but invent these alternate realities.
It's a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
He uses these lies to keep people at a distance,
Yeah.
to avoid real connection. It's particularly interesting how he lies about her son, Ernest, making him out to be this sensitive soul when he's actually the complete opposite.
So it's not just about pushing people away, right? Is he maybe trying to make the world less phony, even if it's just through his lies?
That's a great question, and it gets to the core of who Holden is. He's not just some cynical liar. He's a kid struggling to deal with a world that feels so overwhelming and fake.
He even comes up with this whole thing about having a tumor on the brain to explain why he's leaving Pencey early.
That lie is so revealing. It shows his deep insecurity, his fear of judgment and rejection. It's just easier for him to make up these stories than to be vulnerable and real.
It's like he's building a wall between himself and everyone else and using his lies as the bricks.
Exactly. And that's what makes his story so captivating. We see him seeking connection, but then pushing it away at the same time. He wants something authentic, but he's terrified of it.
Back in the city, he's alone, feeling lost. Checks into a hotel and ends up calling for a prostitute.
This is a big moment. Holden's desperate for a connection, even if it's just physical. But even this leaves him feeling empty. It's like even something as straightforward as this is, well, it's tainted with that phoniness.
He has this very strange conversation with Sunny, the prostitute, about her dress and if she goes to the movies. It's so awkward, but also kind of heartbreaking.
He's trying so hard to connect on some real level, but he just can't. He's searching for someone who gets him, who sees past all the crap, but he keeps hitting walls.
And then things get bad. Maurice, the pimp, shows up and demands more money. They fight, and Holden gets punched.
Yeah, it's a turning point, that violence. It's a brutal reminder that the world is not what Holden wants it to be. He's hurt, both physically and emotionally.
He goes to Ackley's room looking for comfort, but even that doesn't work. Ackley's so wrapped up in himself that he's oblivious to what Holden's going through.
It emphasizes how isolated Holden is. I mean, even in a crowded dorm, he's utterly alone. He's surrounded by people, but can't connect with any of them.
So he leaves Ackley's room and decides to just leave Pencey, period. He's done.
This is big. It's complete rejection of everything he knows. He's desperately trying to find something real, something that matters. But it also leaves him lost, without a direction.
He ends up on a train to New York City and runs into Mrs. Morrow again. He keeps making up more lies, even though he doesn't have to. It's like he's seeing how far he can push it.
It shows how ingrained that lying has become for him. It's not just about protecting himself. It's about having some control, like he's reshaping reality through those lies, convincing himself things are different than they actually are.
Back in New York, Holden feels lost and alone. He goes to Ernia's, this nightclub he used to go to. But even that doesn't live up to what he hoped for. It's full of phonies.
It seems like his search for connection, for something real, is just leading him down a dead end. Everything he experiences pushes him further into despair.
So this is just the beginning of his very messy weekend in the city. I have a feeling things are about to get even more complicated for him.
Oh, yeah. Holden's journey takes him to some dark places. He's forced to face some hard truths about himself and the world. But even in all the chaos, there are these little glimpses of hope, these subtle hints that he might be able to grow, to understand things better.
Holden's spiraling, trying to find a way out of this world he hates. He calls up Sally Hayes, someone he used to date. I guess he was hoping for some kind of connection, some familiarity.
Right, but Sally represents exactly what Holden's rebelling against. She's all about appearances, totally focused on superficial things, completely missing the turmoil that Holden's feeling.
Yeah, their date is a total disaster. Ice skating, a Broadway show, everything just seems to make Holden even more agitated.
It's really clever how Salinger uses these everyday activities to show the growing gap between Holden and the world. The more Sally tries to connect with him on that surface level, the more alienated Holden feels. It's like their inability to communicate just mirrors how messed up he is inside.
Holden tries to explain how he feels, Alice's frustration with the phoniness, but Sally just dismisses it. She gets defensive, even angry.
That clash is huge. It goes to the heart of the novel. Holden desperately wants authenticity, that deeper connection, while Sally represents everything he's trying to get away from.
Holden is really coming apart at the seams. He's drinking a lot, acting impulsively, lashing out at people. It's hard to watch.
It's important to remember that Holden's still a kid, even though he's trying so hard to act all mature and cynical. He's hurting, but doesn't know how to deal with it in a healthy way. His drinking, his outbursts, it's all a cry for help.
There's this really sad part where he calls Jane Gallagher, but she doesn't answer.
That failed connection pushes him further down, Remember, Jane represents that pure connection for Holden, that link to a simpler time. Her not being there just makes his loneliness so much worse.
Instead of talking to Jane, he ends up with Carl Luce, this older guy he knew from a previous school. It shows another side of Holden's alienation.
Yeah, Carl is all about intellectual detachment, the opposite of how open Holden is with his emotions. He's condescending, dismissive of Holden's struggles. It's like Holden wants guidance, but Carl can't give him that.
Holden gets drink again and starts talking about wishing he had a bullet in his gut. It's disturbing.
It's an important image, that bullet. It speaks to his self-destructive side, how he can't deal with the pain. He's turning his emotional pain into something physical.
He leaves the bar feeling completely alone. It's late, it's cold, and he starts wandering around Central Park. This is where things get really dark.
It's a big moment. All of Holden's emotional and physical exhaustion just leads to this breakdown.
Hmm.
He's surrounded by the city, but feels utterly isolated. Salinger's so good at using the setting to reflect Holden's inner state.
He starts thinking about these ducks in the lagoon, wondering if they stay there all winter or fly south. It seems so random, but with Holden, there's always something more to it.
Those ducks represent Holden's uncertainty, his search for a place where he belongs. Like those migrating birds, he's looking for a place to land, a place where he feels safe and understood.
He just loses it completely, starts sobbing uncontrollably. It's really raw, makes you want to just hug him.
It's so heartbreaking, but it's also kind of a release. All that pent-up emotion just pours out. It's a turning point, like something has to change.
And then he decides to sneak back home to see his little sister, Phoebe.
It's love that drives him to do that. Phoebe's one of the few people he truly connects with, someone who sees him without judgment. She's innocence, purity, everything. Holden feels like he's lost.
He gets into the apartment without his parents knowing. This part with Phoebe, it's the emotional core of the book.
It is. It's this tender, heartbreaking moment of true connection in the middle of all this darkness. Phoebe, even though she's so young, she's perceptive. She sees through Holden's act and knows something's wrong.
She immediately calls him out on it, asks him to name one thing he actually likes. He can barely answer.
It shows how deep his despair is. He can't see any good in the world anymore. He's trapped in all that cynicism and disillusionment. It's a reminder of how negativity can make it hard to see anything positive.
Holden tells her about his fantasy of being the catcher in the rye, saving kids from falling off a cliff. It's such a powerful image, but also kind of creepy.
It shows how much Holden wants to protect innocence, to shield kids from the pain of adulthood. It's like he wants to go back to that simpler time before the fall.
It's cool how Phoebe, even as a kid, sees through his fantasy. She reminds him that the poem's actually, if a body meet a body, not catch.
That's so important. It shows that Holden's idea of being a savior is wrong. He can't save everyone from the realities of life. Growing up means facing those challenges. Phoebe's reminding him that life isn't about avoiding the fall, but learning how to handle it.
Even with her realism, Phoebe gives him unconditional love and support. She gives him all her Christmas money. It's a beautiful moment.
It's a pure act of love. Holden's been pushing everyone away, but this really gets to him. It shows that even in the worst times, love can still be there.
Overcome with emotion, he gives Phoebe his red hunting hat. I always thought that hat was like a symbol of his isolation,
The hat is a powerful symbol, yeah. It represents Holden's identity, but also his alienation. Giving it to Phoebe, it's like he's giving her a part of himself. Maybe he hopes she can hold on to that innocence he feels like he's lost.
He leaves the apartment feeling more at peace than he has in a while. It's a brief moment, but an important one.
It's fragile, that peace, but it shows that he can heal. Being with Phoebe reminds him of the power of love, gives him a little bit of hope.
He goes back to Mr. Antolini's, looking for guidance from his old teacher. This is another complicated relationship.
Mr. Antolini is like the voice of reason in Holden's life. He sees Holden's potential, but also his self-destructive behavior. He tries to warn him about the path he's on.
Mr. Antolini gives him this long speech about education and finding his place in the world. It's wise, but I'm not sure Holden's really taking it in.
Holden's exhausted. He's not in the right headspace to really understand what Mr. Antolini's saying. But Salinger gives us, the readers, those insights. He wants us to think about purpose and belonging.
Holden falls asleep on the couch, but wakes up and finds Mr. Antolini patting his head. It's creepy.
A really ambiguous moment. Some people see it as Mr. Antolini just caring, but others see it as something more sinister. Salinger leaves it open, makes you think about how complicated relationships between adults and kids can be.
Holden freaks out and runs away, feeling betrayed and even more alone.
It shows how paranoid he is, how distorted his view of the world has become. He's so focused on phoniness that he misinterprets maybe a harmless gesture.
Now he's really adrift, no connection to school, family, or even a trusted adult. He's burning all his bridges.
He's hit rock bottom. He's drained both emotionally and physically, and left with this huge sense of isolation.
He spends the rest of the night just wandering around New York. It's like he's lost in a maze.
He's trapped in his own world of alienation and can't find a way out. The city, which was supposed to be an escape, has become a symbol of his loneliness.
He ends up back at the Museum of Natural History, a place he used to love. It's familiar, represents stability.
The museum, with its unchanging exhibits, represents that world Holden wishes he lived in, a world where things make sense and stay the same.
But even the museum doesn't bring him comfort this time. He finds "fuck you" written on a wall, a reminder of all that negativity he sees everywhere.
It's like that graffiti is a symbol of the ugliness Holden sees invading even the most pure places. It shatters any hope he had of finding solace there.
Holden actually faints in the bathroom, completely exhausted.
It's the culmination of his breakdown, you know?
Yeah.
His body and mind can't take anymore.
He decides to wait for Phoebe at the museum, holding on to that one last connection he has.
He's made up his mind to run away, to escape that world. But he still wants that connection with Phoebe, even if it's just to say goodbye.
He sees Phoebe coming towards him, carrying his old suitcase. She's packed her stuff, wants to go with him. It's heartbreaking, but also so sweet.
It shows how strong their bond is. She wants to be with him, even if it means leaving everything else behind.
Holden's torn. He's touched by Phoebe's gesture, but knows he can't take her with him. He has to be realistic.
He's being forced to face what he's done. He realizes running away won't fix anything, and he can't make Phoebe carry his pain.
He makes her stay, promises to come back for her. It's a promise filled with uncertainty, but it also has this glimmer of hope.
It's a turning point for Holden. It means he's not giving up entirely.
He watches Phoebe go around and around on the carousel in Central Park. It's such a classic symbol of childhood.
That carousel, it represents the way life keeps going, you know, the ups and downs, the good times and the bad. It reminds us that even when things are dark, beauty and joy are still there.
It starts raining, but Holden doesn't even seem to notice. He's just totally focused on Phoebe, her happiness, bringing him this moment of peace.
It's such a strong image of redemption. Holden's been through so much, but he experiences this real connection, this reminder of the beauty and innocence in the world. Even when things are really bad, hope can still exist.
That carousel scene, man, it's so powerful. Holden standing there in the rain, watching Phoebe go round and round. It's how it all ends, you know?
It is. And that carousel, the way it just keeps going, it's such a perfect image of childhood, you know?
Yeah.
All that joy and possibility. But it also makes you think about how life just keeps happening, the good and the bad, over and over again.
What really got me was how peaceful Holden seems, just watching Phoebe. Like, her happiness is enough to make him forget all his problems, at least for a little while.
It's that pure connection they have. Remember how he's been searching for something real this whole time, something authentic? Well, he finds it there, in Phoebe's laughter. It's a reminder that even when things are really messed up, beauty and joy can still exist.
But the book ends right there. It leaves you with so many questions. What happens to Holden? Does he get help? Does he ever figure out how to be, less cynical, but still hold on to that desire for something real?
That open ending, and that's part of why this book is so great. You have to think about Holden's future, grapple with his character, and what it means to grow up.
It makes you wonder if Holden's just a special case, or if he represents something about being a teenager. I mean, that feeling of not belonging, of trying to find your place. Don't we all go through that in some way?
Oh, for sure. Salinger captures something universal about adolescence. That feeling of being an outsider, struggling to make sense of the world, it's something that resonates with everyone, no matter how old you are.
And Holden's voice, even with all his cynicism and problems, is so relatable. I think that's why people have connected with this book for so long.
Absolutely. That stream of consciousness style, it just pulls you right into Holden's world. You feel everything he's feeling, unfiltered. And you may not always agree with him, but you get him. You feel his pain, his confusion, that longing for something more.
It's interesting that Salinger doesn't give you any easy answers, There's no neat ending to Holden's story. It's all about ambiguity, about what might happen.
Right. It's not a book about finding all the answers, but about asking the right questions. It makes you think about the complicated nature of life, the challenges of growing up, and finding your place in a world that doesn't always make sense.
So we've really explored The Catcher in the Rye, and I'm wondering what stuck with you the most about Holden's story? Did any of it remind you of your own life, your own struggles with figuring out who you are and where you belong?
And maybe even more importantly, what do you think happens to Holden after the book ends? Does he make it in the adult world without losing himself? Does he hold on to that little bit of hope we see at the carousel? Maybe he even finds his own catcher in the rye, someone who truly understands and accepts him.
Those are great questions to think about. This is the end of our deep dive, but the conversation doesn't have to end here. Keep thinking about Holden Caulfield, keep asking those tough questions, and keep searching for your own meaning in this crazy world. Thanks for joining us.